Hello and welcome to the channel. Thanks for tuning into my guide to give you tips and tricks, hopefully to help you level up your gameplay. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Fee and this is Beyond the Fundamentals, Chapter 2. What did you search? So like the last chapter, I'm going to break this up into 3 parts as well. And again, don't worry if these titles seem a little vague. We'll be deep diving into each of these in the video. So part 1, knowledge is power. And I know I sound like your English teacher telling you this, but it is true. Obviously, the more you know about the game, the better equipped you'll be to strategize in your matches. So let's just break it down. What knowledge are we talking about here? The most important thing you need to know inside and out, obviously, is going to be your deck. This includes every single matchup. Do you want first or second? Does it matter if you go first or second? What are your deck's matchup winning cards or plays? What's your most important turn? And what cards should you be looking for in your mulligan? So if you know the answers to these questions without batting an eye, you're in a really good spot for the first layer of what you need to know. And then the next thing you need to now understand, which I touched upon in the last chapter, no longer has to do with you. It actually has to do with your opponent and how their deck functions. So you want to ask yourself, what does their curve look like? Do they want to go first or second? And this is a very, very important question because a couple of popular decks right now, let's just take PB Luffy and Purple Luffy as an example. So both of these decks are very notorious for taking first any chance they get. So in these matchups, even if your deck doesn't like to go first, it may be worth going first against these decks just so you can disrupt their game plan. Next question is going to be, what is their most important turn? Is there a way for us to disrupt their most important turns? And what is their counter ratio? So this is something that you need to understand, especially against some of the top decks. So let's just take a look at blue purple Luffy and even some green purple Luffy decks. These decks actually don't run a lot of 2k counter, if you guys didn't know. They run anywhere between 8 to 10. And then on top of that, they actually don't run a lot of 1k counters either. So typically a lot of the like rogue decks and not top tier decks, besides these guys, run about like 20 1k counters, even more. But these guys run a lot of bricks totaling about 12 to 14 1k counters. So this means that without any Dawn up, they actually only average about 560 to 680 counter per card in hand. And so knowing this, it can help you really pressure them hard if you're able to either rest down their Dawn or if they have no Dawn left available. So next question we're going to cover is, did they mulligan or did they keep their hand? And what are their priority 2Ks? And I think these two questions is something that is not very much talked about. And so I wanted to just deep dive into these a little bit more. So let's just take a look at the first one here, which is, did they mulligan or not? And people ask me all the time, why should I care? So let's actually take a look at both scenarios here. So if your opponent decides to keep their hand, they're actually telling you right off their bat, they're most likely going to curve out. Even if they don't curve out every single turn, they are most likely going to get their most important turn off. Okay, so let's actually just take a look at RG Smoker as an example. This may not always be true, but most likely if he kept his hand, he probably has that 5-cost Smoker in hand. Or if we take a look at Shanks as an example, if you're playing like an aggro deck like Bello Betty or Zuro, that Shanks player probably has that Lucky Roo in hand. So knowing this information, it's important to ask yourself a couple of questions. Can my current hand keep up against his most important turns? More importantly, can this hand get worse if I decide to mulligan? Because if you have a decent hand, it's actually better to work with what you have than to risk getting an even worse hand and instantly losing the match from there. So obviously this will be a judgment call that's up to you, just because you know your deck more than anyone else. And you can call whether or not your hand is workable or not, right? So let's take a look at the other end of the stick now. If they did mulligan, now the only turn you have to worry about really is their most important turn, just because obviously there's going to be some games where they mulligan and they luckily find their curve anyways. But here you should be more concerned about their big turns, just because them telling you that they mulligan means that they didn't find what they wanted and they're just hoping for the best in this mulligan. Okay, so enough of this mulligan talk. Let's talk about something that actually helped me be able to predict my opponent's hand and what their counter looks like, which is priority 2Ks. And I know what you may be thinking, priority what now? So in most meta lists, you'll see that they run anywhere between 8 to 12 2K counters. However, some of these 2K counters are actually more valuable than others. And this will obviously change here and there depending on the state of your game and what your board looks like. But let's actually just take blue purple Luffy for example here. This will just help us better explain what I'm talking about here. So here's a list of typical 2K counters that a blue purple Luffy player would run. So to better explain this point, let's look at this board state right here. And you're in the late game, your opponent was able to develop a sizable board and probably will be looking to end the match next turn. Now pause the video here if you need to, but if we go back to the list of 2K counters that he could be running, there's a clear winner of what that priority 2K is. So this means that even though yes, that Usohachi can be used defensively as a 2K counter, most likely your opponent's gonna want to save him if possible to be able to close out the match in the next couple turns. And this actually brings us to part 2, which is pay attention to your opponent's counter. And obviously we can now predict and track his 2K counters thanks to knowing about priority 2Ks, but what about his 1K counters? Well, depending on what your opponent uses as counter, especially mid to early game, you can actually predict what they have in their hand. So I think this is really easily explainable if we just take a look at a couple of board states. So let's look at this first scenario here. We're playing as Blackbeard and we're swinging into Bonnie with a 5K swing, and your opponent actually counters with a Cavendish. This means that 99% of the time, that Bonnie player has another Cavendish in hand. Because he is one of the most powerful cards to play on curve, there's no way that any Bonnie player would just ditch a Cavendish without having another one as a backup. So looking at this board, even though it's not ideal to use your finger pistol on Tashigi being a 3 cost, it may be worthwhile to do so right now just so you're able to remove her more important bodies in future turns. In this next example, we're in the same situation except we're going against purple Luffy. So if we swing in a 5K at his leader here and he gives us a 7 cost Sanji as counter, this actually tells us one of two things. He doesn't necessarily have another Sanji coming up, but he has a 7 Don play in the form of either Luffy Taro or even another Sanji. And so you should be able to decide based on those two possibilities what your next play could be. So finally, we're at part 3. What did you search? And this is where we're going to tie the chapter together, because so far we've just been covering the hypotheticals and predicting your opponent's hand in future plays. But now knowing and keeping track of your opponent's actual searches will help us even more to map out what their hand looks like. So to help me explain this, let's actually circle back to one of the menaces of the new starter decks, which is PB Luffy. Let's say he uses his searcher law to search and reveal that he added a Usohachi to his hand. For all intents and purposes, whatever board state you're in, this Usohachi has been determined to be a priority 2K. And so if we swing at his lead to fish for 2K counters, which means swinging in for 6K in this example, and he gives up the Usohachi, we can now confidently predict one of two possibilities. So him giving us that Usohachi being a priority 2K means that he either has multiple Usohachis in hand, and so he's willing to part ways with one of them, or this is actually his only 2K in hand, which you can confirm with another 2K fish. So in conclusion to this part, the better you can understand the board state and identify what are the most important cards that your opponent wants to keep in order to either win the game or to just come back into the game, the more accurately you can predict what's going on with their hand. And so I wanted to end off with just a friendly reminder that in person, a player's body language sometimes gives away what's going on with their cards as well. And I'm not going to go like super deep into this one just because it's very nuanced, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of like poker channels out there that cover this subject. But honestly, some players wear their heart on their sleeve when they play, and you can definitely use this to your advantage. So that's basically it for chapter 2, guys. I hope you found some value out of this one. I think I'm only going to be releasing maybe one more, and that's going to be regarding the deck building aspect of the game. And honestly, if you guys knew me already, deck building is my most passionate part of any TCG, and so I'm really excited to share what I've learned about just like deck building in general with you all, and hopefully you find some value out of that one too. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for hanging out with me until the very end. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and just leaving a like on the video, as it honestly just helps support me and keeps me going to push out content for you guys. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 2 of the guide, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.